Talmud Bavali, Masechta Sukkah, 3a. Because of ventilation. But according to the authority who states that they deferred only in the case of a small sukkah, is it then customary for a queen to sit in a diminutive sukkah? Rabba Barada answered, the ruling was necessary only in the case of sukkah constructed with many recesses. Is it then customary for a queen to sit in a sukkah constructed with many recesses? Rav Ashi answered, the ruling was necessary only in the case of the recesses in it. The rabbis hold the opinion that her sons sat in the proper sukkah, while she sat in one of the recesses for reasons of modesty, and hence they made no remark. While Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that her sons sat with her, and still they made no remark. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak stated, the halacha is that the sukkah must be able to contain his head, the greater part of his body, and his table. Rav Abba said to him, in agreement with whom is this ruling? Is it agreement with Beis Shammai? The other answered him, according to whom else? Another version of Abba said to him, who holds this opinion? He answered, Beis Shammai, and do not budge from it. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak demurred. Whence do we know that Beth Shammai and Beth Hillel are in dispute concerning a small sukkah? Perhaps their dispute concerns a large sukkah, as for instance, where a man sat at the entrance of the sukkah with his table inside the house. Beth Shammai holding the opinion that we prohibit it, lest he be drawn after the table, while Beth Hillel holds that we do not prohibit it. This, furthermore, may be deduced also from the wording, for it was stated, if his head and the greater part of his body were within the sukkah, but his table was within the house, Beth Shammai declared invalid, and Beth Hillel declared valid. But if it is, as you say, it ought to read, if the sukkah can contain, or cannot contain his head, etc. But do they not dispute concerning a small sukkah? Has it not in fact been taught, if a sukkah can contain his head, the greater part of his body, and his table, it is valid? Rabbi says it must be 4 cubits square, while in another brisa it has been taught. Rabbi says any sukkah which is not 4 cubits square is invalid, while the sages say, even if it can contain only his head and the greater part of his body, it is valid. Whereas of his table, there is no mention. Does not thus a contradiction arise between the two brises? We must consequently infer therefrom that one is according to Beis Shammai and the other according to Beis Hillel. Mar Zutra observed, the wording of this mission also proves it, since it says Beis Shammai declares it valid and Beis Hillel declares it valid. And if it were as you say, it ought to read, Beis Shammai says he has not fulfilled his obligation, while Beis Hillel says he has. But do not the words, he whose head were present a difficulty? And the fact is that they differ on 2 points, on a small sukkah and a large one, but the text is defective and is to be read thus: he whose head, or the greater part of his body, were within the sukkah, and his table within the house. The Shammai says he has not fulfilled his obligation, and Beis Hillel says he has. And if it is able to contain only his head and the major part of his body alone, Beis Shammai declares it invalid, and Beis Hillel valid. Who is the authority for that which our rabbis taught? A house which is not 4 cubits square is free from the obligations of mezuzah, and parapet does not contract Levitical uncleanness from leprosy, is not irredeemable among the dwelling houses of a walled city, nor does one return on its account from the array of war, nor need an Erev be prepared for it, nor shituv, nor does one place therein an Erev. Sukkah B, 3b. Nor make of an extension between two cities, nor can brothers or partners divide it. Must we say that it agrees with Rabbi and not with the rabbis? No. One can even say it agrees with the rabbis. The rabbis say it only with regard to a sukkah, which is a temporary abode. With regard to a house, which is a permanent abode, even the rabbis admit that if it has an area of 4 cubits square, people dwell therein, otherwise they do not dwell therein. Master said, it is free from the obligations of mezuzah and parapet, and does not contract Levitical uncleanliness from leprosy. It is not irredeemable among the houses of a walled city, nor does one return it on its account from the array of war. What is the reason? Because the term house occurs in all these commandments. Because the term house occurs in all these commandments. Nor need an Erev be prepared for it, nor a shituf, nor does one place therein an Erev. What is the reason? Since it is unsuitable as a dwelling, now the Erev of courtyards is not placed therein, that a shituf may be placed therein. What is the reason? Since it is no worse than a courtyard with an alleyway, as we have learned. The Erev courtyards are placed in a courtyard, and the shituf of an alley in the alley. And the point was raised. How can it be said that the Erevs of courtyards are placed in the courtyard? Have we not, in fact, learned if a man places Erev in a gatehouse or in etc. or in a gallery, it is not valid Erev. He dwells therein cannot be a cause of prohibition. Say rather, Erevs of courtyards are placed in a house of the courtyard, and the shitufs of alleys in a courtyard of the alley, and this is no worse than a courtyard in an alley. Nor make of an extension between two cities, since it is not regarded even as an outpost. What is the reason? Outposts are suitable for their purpose. This is unsuitable for anything. Nor can brothers or partners divide. The reason apparently is that it is not 4 cubits square. But if it were 4 cubits square, presumably they could divide it. Have we not learned? A courtyard should not be divided unless there be 4 cubits of each of the parties. Say rather, the law of division does not apply to it, as it does the case of courtyard. For Rav Huna ruled, a courtyard is divided according to the number of its doors, and Rav Hizda said 4 cubits are allowed for each door, and the remainder is divided equally. But this applies only to a house which is intended to stand, and therefore we allow it a share in the courtyard. But as to this, a hovel which is intended to be demolished, we do not allow it a share in the courtyard. If a sukkah has more than 20 cubits high, and he has diminished its height with bolsters and cushions, it is not a valid diminution.